Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. On February 14th, 1983, 4 homeless women and 6 children moved into an emergency residence just off of Times Square. Today, that one residence has grown into a network of temporary and permanent homes that provide shelter to more than 1,200 women and over 2,000 children every night. The amazing organization is WIN, Women in Need, and they offer much more than just a bed to these families. Its president, Bonnie Stone, is my guest today. Welcome.
Thank you, Ronnie.
You're really a holistic organization.
Yes, we are.
So explain what that means, please.
We start with the premise that everybody who comes to us is homeless. But homeless is one of those simple words. And when you drill down into what does that mean, everybody has a different conception of that. And so the public, in general, thinks of homeless people as a man or a woman who's usually disheveled and mentally ill and on the street. And that is true for some homeless people. But in fact, 80% of the homeless in New York City are women and children in families in shelters.
How do they happen to come there?
The causes of homelessness?
They come from all different kinds.
They come from all different kinds of causes, all different reasons. Some of them are evicted from their apartments for a variety of reasons. Some of them are very, very immature young women who were in the foster care system, and when they get out and they have a couple of kids and they can't keep it together, they have nowhere to go. Some of them are domestic violence survivors. Many of them are. Mm-hmm. And then there's some working families who run into a problem and they're with us as well.
And some of them have, up until now, lived doubled up or tripled up with friends or family and no longer can do that.
Yes.
So how many of them, I mean, some of them are working people.
Yes, yes. Almost 20% of the people who come in are working.
Isn't it amazing?
They may not be making enough.
Yeah. Or
it may be episodic, but yeah.
Right. And what percentage are youngsters who've aged out of the foster care system? Do you
Probably
know?
about 15%.
So that always fascinated me because that was such a problem of foster care, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, they're now 18 or 19 or even 21 if they stay longer in the foster care system, and they don't have a network.
What is the foster care? I don't mean to get off on this, but what does the foster care system think is going to happen to them after they age out? At 18, right?
Well, they're 18, and then I think there's an option to stay in until you're 21. Oh. I think it's a problem. Yeah. I mean, you throw an 18-year-old or a 21-year-old out on their own. How many of us could handle that?
So you operate shelters, temporary.
Yes.
You operate permanent housing.
Yes.
Is the shelter is more than just a bed and a cot?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Let's talk. What kind of a shelter is it?
Sure. Every one of our families gets a unit. Let's call it a unit.
Yeah.
It could be an apartment, it could be a studio, it could be a locked space in another area. But every family lives totally by themselves. So they have privacy, they have safety, and they have their family. And so they have a chance to breathe and then start to rebuild their lives.
And we call it holistic because they have other services available.
Absolutely.
So let's explain it.
So when a family comes to us, the first thing we do is get them settled in their space and give them a key. So they actually have the dignity of a key and a private space. And then the next morning, we bring them in for a review. What's wrong? What's happened? How can we help you? Where are your kids? Are they in school? Do you have medical needs? We go through a long list. It takes a couple of hours to find out what's going on because every family's different. Mm. And then we start to lay out a plan with them to do the things that are needed to get them back up and out. And it takes some doing. Mm. And the kids go immediately back to school.
Yeah. And do they have their own kitchen units?
Yes.
They are responsible then for preparing their meals, and they
Yes. We have some emergency food at intake, but basically they are responsible.
But all this is also developing and learning and enhancing their life skills, right? And how they
how to budget, how to keep it clean, how to cook. Yeah. All of those things are things that we help them with if they need it.
Yeah.
We analyze each family separately.
And then who's lucky enough to get into your permanent housing?
Well, our permanent housing is reserved for families that have specific deep problems and will need not only the housing, but will need follow-up services to keep them together. And that is incredibly necessary for a small number of people, and it really works. It really works.
And it's really it needs to be a permanent
permanent.
component.
It's permanent.
And it's then in homeless policy, it needs to have that kind of
Yes,
place
but it's
for somebody.
and it's recognized.
Yeah.
In 20 years ago, this started to be a recognized policy for homeless individuals, and it wasn't until the last 4 or 5 years that the government recognized that you had to do that for some number of the homeless families as well.
Is the emphasis? I mean, of course, it's on helping the mothers, but it's also on worrying about the future of the children.
Oh, absolutely,
isn't it?
absolutely. There's a lot of research that has come to bear about the brain development on the child and the effects of stress on children, and it's enormous. And the whole experience of homelessness is a tremendous stressor on children. So the idea of focusing on the children is something that we do at WIN, and we're hoping that we can influence the city and all the other providers to do that as well. And there's a lot of interest in it.
Yeah.
It's no funds, of course, the usual story, but we do it with private money, and we're able to do quite a bit.
Private money.
Yeah.
Let's talk about homeless policy, because you've been in this field for a long time.
I have.
I think I met you in the 70s,
Right.
I guess. And then it was shelters and drugs.
It was emergency shelter at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
But you've spent all of this time, right?
Yeah.
Well,
I did take a little break in there.
you did, that's right. And it's such a fascinating break. Tell us about it.
I took two breaks. One was I went to work for the Long Island Railroad, where I was the vice president of the Long Island Railroad, which you laugh at and I laughed
No,
at
I
it.
don't laugh at it. It's
Everybody
just
I know
you know,
laughed
yeah.
at it. But it is government.
Yeah.
And so my responsibility, I was vice president, and my responsibility was everything that was not running the trains.
Right.
Because the people who ran the trains wanted nothing to do with anything
I'm sure,
else.
yeah.
So I was the go-to person for the passengers and for the communities surrounding the trains. So it was great, and it was government. So.
And you mentioned that you developed an insight into I remember reading something about the fact that you saw the difference between commuters
Oh, yes.
who go to their homes,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So
Most
interesting.
of my work has been in and around people of poverty.
Yeah.
And people who have tremendous needs. And they feel very disenfranchised. They do not feel that they own the world around them. I went to the Long Island Railroad and I found that every commuter thought they owned everything to do with the railroad because they're taxpayers.
Yeah.
And they pay, and they know that their tax money is going to the railroad. Completely different group of people.
So you're not on the receiving end, you're on the giving.
Well,
You're
it's
it's
complicated.
more complicated.
It's very complicated, but it was fascinating to me.
Right. So how did that affect what you do now?
Well, it just broadened my understanding. And actually, what has been wonderful in the last 15 years is to be able to put very wealthy people and not so wealthy people, middle-class people, together with us in helping the homeless. People want to help the homeless. They really do, but they have no idea what to do. And I understand that. It's very, very hard to individually go and help the homeless. I mean, you can give money on the subway, which is not a good idea. But if you get involved with an organization like ours, you actually can see what your time, money, and effort can go to.
I have a funny story, but it's not, the point of it is nothing, but there was a homeless woman sitting on the stoop on Columbus Avenue, and my husband went to get her supper. And he came back and gave her some supper, and she said, "What is this?" And he said something about, she says, "It has meat, so I'm a vegetarian." And she gave it back to her.
I know.
So it's the effort of wanting to do something.
People are individuals.
Yeah, they are, and you can't lose that individuality.
No, you cannot, ever.
So a program that really recognizes this is going to be more popular.
Absolutely.
So do we have a homeless policy?
We do have an amazing homeless policy in New York City. It's not complete, but it's amazing. It's for the last 33 years. The city has had an ironclad commitment to house every single homeless person who needs it. That is remarkable. And that was memorialized through a lawsuit and then through law, local law. So we're the only jurisdiction in the entire country that has a total commitment to housing every single homeless person. And most remarkable from my perspective is they've done it.
Yeah.
Now, we can argue about how good it is. How do you get them out? How do you treat them better? What about the different groups? You can argue about all of that, and we do. There's a vigorous argument all the time. But the basic fact is that New York City houses every homeless person. It's amazing.
But how do they do it? It goes.
They do it by opening shelters, and in emergency times, opening hotels, and they scramble every single year to keep up because the numbers have been going off the charts, but they do it. And that's, I think, remarkable. It's not something that government usually is able to do.
Right. And then they're always vulnerable to criticism.
Of course,
because of the quality of the stuff.
They get criticism no matter what they do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, we are a very, very well-known and well-respected organization, and we're very good neighbors wherever we are. But there's NIMBY everywhere. So we're in the process of opening a shelter this summer in Brooklyn, and the neighbors are very upset. So, you know, we have to talk to them.
Yeah.
We have to sit down with them, see if we can help them get through this.
Right.
These shelters are not dangerous places, but people are afraid.
They're afraid of women and children? Or?
Yeah, even that. Because when you say, listen, it's women and children, and they say, well, their boyfriends are going to come around. Yeah. So they're afraid. And the fact is that there's nothing to be afraid of. But convincing a community who's afraid is not easy.
It's very difficult.
And once you're there, they relax.
Yeah.
Because they're not dangerous places.
And what about the impact on schools? In your shelters, I mean, the kids go to the local school?
Depends. If the family wants to keep them in the school that they were at, they can. It could be a problem getting them back and forth, which we will help them with, and the Department of Education will help them with as well.
They do the busing and stuff?
They will.
Oh,
but we get kids right back into school. And the other thing is the city has a basic policy, which is not always followed, that the family is placed closest to the shelter, nearest the youngest child's school.
Right.
So that make it easier.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen 100% of the time.
And all of the shelters are contracted, right?
Almost all. There are still some. In the early days, it was all city.
Yeah.
And then in the early 90s, it was moved over to the not-for-profits. And now there are a few city-run shelters, but over 90% of them are through not-for-profits.
The shelter that was so in the news with the young woman.
That was a city shelter.
That was a city shelter.
Yeah.
And that's still open?
It's open, but not for children.
Oh.
So they've made a very, very important change. It was physically not right for children.
Right.
And it showed.
Yeah.
And they made it very fast. This administration, I really hats off to them. They changed the policy right away. And now it's still a shelter, but not for kids.
It was interesting, isn't it, to see how you cure a problem, or you don't cure it, but you at least accommodate, bring better standards, that it has to sometimes be made public.
Yeah.
You have to look for the crisis in order to generate the policy.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, that whole
I'm sure you've
crisis,
been through many of those.
That crisis has shown a light on the children in shelter, which nobody talked about at all.
Right.
And now people are talking about it, and I hope that's the beginning of something really good.
How many of the families you have were homeless as children, the mothers?
Now that's a good question. I don't have a quick answer for that, but there is some intergenerational.
Yeah.
And also, Ronnie, there have been some bad changes in policy in recent years, and that is about housing. And so homeless families, up until a few years ago, would be able to get permanent subsidies. They can't get that anymore. That changes the life of a child more so than the life of a parent.
So there may be an apartment and the rent goes up, or something happens, so they can no longer afford it. They just need a couple $100s, and they can't do it.
Trouble.
So they land up in a shelter, and it costs how much money?
The shelters are expensive.
Yeah.
The shelters cost about $35,000 a year for a family, which includes the rent and the security and the services, and it seems like a lot. The problem is that if you just turn that money over into housing, you still have another group of people coming in the next. So it builds. It's an exponential number, and the city's not prepared to pay.
Right, and it also, it's supposed to move through. I mean,
they're not supposed to stay.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? Because
so at the end of the day, it's a
up.
housing problem.
Yeah.
It's a
So
very
how do we ever resolve that?
Well, I think we have to head on housing, and we have to head on subsidies. The Section 8, which is the famous subsidy, where you pay a third of your income, that's a great program.
That's a federal program.
It's a federal program, and essentially there's no more. And so now we have a city which has grown by 15% in population. The housing starts are not keeping up with the population. People are becoming homeless more and more, and Section 8's gone. So you're putting people in an
and at the same time, rents are going
and
higher.
rents are sky high.
It's just incredible.
The vacancy rate is not.
How do you pay attention to the real estate market? How
we do.
What are we going to do?
Well,
how are we going to stop this?
I don't want to put that hat on housing policy, because that is a huge and important issue which the federal government has walked away from.
Yeah.
And the city has to decide how to deal with this. And I know the new mayor has a new housing policy. The old mayor had a housing policy. You have to put your shoulder to the wheel and push. And the new mayor is talking about 200,000 apartments. That will help. That will take 10 years. Probably we need more than that.
And a lot of that is not necessarily new. It's renovating, rehab.
Yeah, it's a combination.
Taking over as much real estate as you can find and doing it.
And then you come into the issue of density.
Right.
Which
build higher, higher, higher.
Build higher and higher and higher, which communities don't like.
And we found out too, haven't we, from public housing?
Don't
we find the campuses that are smaller, you know, when you've got clusters of housing?
Ronnie, that's a big subject. And you know what? Across the country, public housing has run into a lot of problems. In New York, it's not bad.
Yeah.
And it's, we need to maintain it.
Oh, definitely. There's no doubt. But we need to add to it.
We need to add to it. We need to add to it.
Yeah. So do you find that you have a lot of immigrants in your population?
No.
Isn't that interesting?
No.
How do you explain that?
I think there's a different expectation among immigrants. And I'm not expert on this, but I think they cluster more in families and they take care of each other. And they live in perhaps terrible conditions, but they don't ask for public services.
It's just fascinating. So if you were able to wave a wand, what would you recommend?
Housing.
Yeah.
Housing and kindness. And
steering support service.
Yes, steering people to what they need to do, to teach them about work if they don't know about it, to help them find work, to help them get education. They have to take care of themselves. But you can't expect a family to step up to the real estate prices that we have, the rental prices, without help.
Are a lot of the women high school graduates?
About half.
About half. Do you teach?
We have had some GED programs, but we try not to be all things for all people. We try to get people to
go to the program.
Yeah. We had a college come in and do some GED programs where we had large shelters, and that's great. So we try to pull together what people need.
In what areas is the homeless problem got similar? I mean, I was just thinking about criminal justice and different areas. What are similarities?
Well, you have to divide the homeless population into single people, single men, single women, and families. In the families, there's really not a serious criminal justice issue. In the single women are very, very mentally ill. And they need real care and real health care. The men have some mental illness, but there's a lot of men who have criminal records.
And is their problem accentuated by the lack of ability to assimilate back into the community?
Sure.
So it's that coming back and the reentry.
The reentry for
so we talk about recidivism in prisons. What you call it reentry?
Right. In homeless, when there was a subsidy for housing, rental, after shelter, there was very, very low reentry percentage, 2, 3 a year. Now it's much, much higher. And I have to estimate because we don't have really good numbers, but it's probably in the 25 to 40% range now because the subsidies are critical and they don't exist.
Yeah, and it's not there. Do any of the women with their children want to move someplace else and can't afford to get there?
Yes, and we help them. Actually, if we have a family that is really stable and really has the finances are straightened out and they have an idea and they have a conceptual, and there's a place upstate New York or Pennsylvania that makes sense for them, we'll help them get there. Absolutely.
And then do you hand their case over to somebody or no? They just they're sort of on their own.
Yeah, they're kind of on their own. But we try to work with them to make sure that it's a real plan.
Yeah.
So they don't land up coming back.
It's such an amazing situation, and you can see people who are going to work every day and then they go home to a shelter.
That's right. That's right. And you walked into one of our shelters, and I would invite you to come.
Yeah.
People look like people. They don't look any different. And the kids are kids, and the people are people, and you just would never know.
So when you get the people from the central, we still have that central intake.
Yes. The city is the central.
Where do you go if you're a homeless person and you need help?
You go to the Bronx if you're a family. And there's a building in the Bronx, and you will get, if you are homeless and there's no option for you, and the city will press you very hard to find an option. But if not, you'll be in a shelter that night. And the same is true for the homeless men and women, but it's not there. There are other places.
But it's the luck of the draw where you go.
Yes. It's where, well, yes, it's the luck of the draw. It's where there's space.
Yeah. I see. How often do you have space?
Never. we turn over a room when a family leaves in 4 hours, and we have another family. We have the most efficient system you can imagine. I talk to commercial hotel owners, and I say, well, how big are you when you're considered full? Oh, we're full at about 85%. Well, we're at 99%, and we have to turn over in 4 hours.
Yeah, 4 hours. So a family comes in, they just have a few of their belongings,
Yes.
And the children. You provide them with the linens,
Linens, the beds, the pots and pans, right,
and
towels.
and the food the first night.
If they need it, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then do they get an allowance to go marketing?
Not from us. If they're working, they
Yeah.
have money. If they are on public assistance, they have to be in a caseload, and they have to manage their money, and they have to use food stamps if that's what it is. So again, each family is different.
So most of the families on public assistance?
Yes, most of them are.
I'm just trying to figure
Yes.
out as a...
And they live like other people, except that they're in a shelter.
How can you not be depressed when you're poor and in this
It
problem?
is, depression is a huge issue for the women. It is an enormous issue. And that is something that we work on very, very strongly.
It's always struck me as one of the most forgotten by the public of the stress of living in
It's
a
enormous
situation.
enormous stress, and depression is widespread.
Right.
And we try to buoy them up. I mean,
Yeah.
we take them and try to give them the energy and the motivation to take care of themselves, because we're not there to take care of them. We're there to help them and settle them down and give them a base and some instruction.
And is your staff, are you affiliated with mental health organizations, or do you provide? We
do not do literal psychiatric work, but we have case managers, and we have lots of relationships with others that do. And we do have one program, which is a substance abuse program, which does have mental health services in it.
So if you were designing homeless policy, you would reactivate Section 8.
Yeah. If I could wave a wand, it would
Yeah.
be Section 8, Section 8, Section 8.
And what else?
And
But then you have to have the
housing.
apartments that they can afford with the Section 8.
That's right. That's why you have to have a housing policy as well.
So do you, I mean, has there been discussion of attaching it to developers?
Sure, sure. And
I don't just mean, 40, whatever they call it, the inclusionary housing. I don't mean that, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the city now is in deep discussions with developers of all different stripes, private developers, not-for-profit developers. So I think they're very, very serious about attacking the housing part of this. But you have to talk to them.
What's the size of your budget?
We'll write a budget for $57 million in July.
And what was the budget when it started? Like a couple of $100? And
oh, yeah.
the shelter was with a church.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's amazing.
It's amazing.
So what percentage is our contributions in philanthropy?
We are raising, this year we'll raise about $6.5 million in private money. And that's not enough, actually.
Right.
So we're in a big effort to increase that.
How do you do that?
You do it every way you can. We have an incredible annual gala where we really squeeze people hard. And this year we had an amazing gala. We raised over $3 million at the Waldorf. It was fabulous.
But then you have to find the people to get.
You have to. It takes all year long to work this out. And we have a fabulous board of directors and all of their friends and contacts. And then we have some online efforts that we're doing. We go after individuals and institutions and foundations, and we try everything.
What's the percentage of foundation support? Is that a lot too?
It's about 25%.
And do you have to come up with innovative programs?
Yes,
to get the
sometimes yes, sometimes no. Some foundations are wonderful.
Yeah.
Excuse me for the ones that I'm... They say, look, we trust you. We understand the mission. We understand where the money's going. Spend it. Other foundations want a specific program. And it depends. I mean, there are foundations who want a very fancy program for a little bit of money in 1 year, and I say, I can't do it. So it's a conversation with every one of the foundations.
And you've got a great website.
Robin Hood, by the way, is our biggest foundation, but we have others.
And how long have you worked with them for a long time?
Robin has been around for Women in Need, I think, for 20 years.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So people, if they want to help, and there are all kinds of ways to help, right?
All kinds of ways.
You don't just have to give money.
No, but
that's a nice
it's
thing.
a very good thing to do.
So they
can volunteer as well.
Yeah, and you can go to nyc.org.
Yes.
And
please, we'll take $10 donations, $25,000 donations, 100,000. We have donors, thousands of donors, and we need more. So it's a good way to connect to an issue if it means something to you, if you want to help, and we can guarantee that the money will be spent.
And it's an investment in the future, which I think is what
for the kids particularly.
People have to understand the importance of that.
I agree.
It's a great organization, and I'm so delighted to hear more about it.
Thank you.
And I hope that people will contact you and really
flood
help.
Flood those emails. Okay.
Thank you so much, Bonnie Stone.
Thank you, Ronnie.
We went through a lot. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.